Everybody, my name's Joe and I'm a real alcoholic. I've done the work out of the big book with sponsors that have done the same, and I've made all the amends that I can make. I'm living my amends today, and I am practicing 10, 11, and 12 to the best of my willingness, and it's always about my willingness. So, God, it's interesting because I'm a member of this group, so, normally I don't like to know what step I'm on, so I knew we were on this first part of step 12. So now I'm obviously jammed up. I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? What am I going to sound like? And when I don't know that, it's amazing because I'm so much more inspired. So, just clear my mind and let God in and let him, his words, my mouth, that kind of thing. But anyway, so practical experience shows that, nothing can so keep us sober than intensive work with other alcoholics. So what's the practical experience? The practical experience is what I've actually done, right? So I've actually got to this point, and I think about, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is sort of baking a cake. It's got like these 12 major ingredients in it, right? So if I follow those ingredients up till this point, then I'm going to get the result. It's a promise. It tells us as we do steps 1 through 12, the way that it's laid out as honestly and as genuinely as I can, because let's face it, we do this work and the truth changes over time. My reality with this work changes. So, if I'm honest and I'm open and I'm willing, then I'm going to have a spiritual experience. What is my spiritual experience? Well, you know what? The way I used to act and behave, I don't do that anymore. I was talking to somebody before a meeting. She goes, God, it was really cold today and it was kind of crappy out. And I was thinking, geez, wouldn't it be a great day to have a drink and maybe do some drugs? And I'm like, but you know what? How do you know that you had a spiritual experience? Is you can have the thought and then let it go, wave it goodbye, and not really do anything about it, right? And that's the change. That's the shift, right? Is that we have sort of this relationship with a power greater than ourselves that will help us stay sane and sober, and not just sober in body, but sober in mind and soul, right? And so, I've been doing this work for 19 years. I have not been 19 years sober, coming up on 4 years in June. So the reality is that this work requires vigilance. It requires constant, continuous, daily practice, okay? So that's how I'm going to maintain my spiritual well-being. And, and I've worked with a number of guys. I've just finished hearing 2 fifth steps, so I've had experience in taking people through the process. But one of the things that I find sometimes, and I was sort of a victim of this belief, was that, the writing is the solution. The writing is the magic, and I hear people say, I've kind of fallen off track, I've done more writing, I'm doing more inventory, and I fell into that same belief. I've done a number of inventories because of my having picked up, but I was listening to this podcast, and this made perfect sense to me, because the work in this book tells us that the purpose of doing the work is to continue to grow spiritually, right? So if I'm doing what I'm instructed to do, and I'm doing whatever I need to do in order to maintain my spiritual health, then I'm going to stay connected to that power, right? So I don't necessarily need to continue to always have to go back to the writing over and over and over again to feel like that's the solution. The magic is in the pen and pencil. It is initially, but this is a quote that I heard in a podcast that, every once in a while you sort of hear these things in my meditation. I have a number of different things that I do. And one of them is I listen to this podcast, and it says, and I wrote it down, it says, the power is not in the steps. The steps are the vehicle to the power, right? And that power is God, or whatever we come to believe. And that really kind of struck me because, I used to believe, and I think many people still are under the illusion that somehow, if I keep doing some of this writing and I keep trying to figure it out, that I'm going to be okay, and that's not what it is. It's about the blind faith that I have to practice this every day. People have done this work. The first 100 people who did this work got sober and stayed sober, right? And so I have to understand that the practical experience is what I've done to get here, and it's been a hard and bumpy road. But I'd like to believe that this ability to be connected to my higher power has grown in a way that I can't even explain. And it's just about, the ability to sort of sit with the discomfort and the pain. That's what a spiritual experience is. It doesn't mean that my life is going to be great. It means that I have the ability to be present in my life with no matter what's going on. And I think that when people see this, that's the stuff that attracts other individuals. That's the message that we try to carry, in this work. And, and what is the message that I'm carrying? So, I don't want to lose touch with the fact that, for alcoholics, we're doomed, particularly for the real alcoholic. I'm not the kind of guy that can go to regular meetings. All AA is great. I've tried this before. The gal that initially introduced me to this program is deceased from this disease. She died. She just didn't get the solution in the way that was necessary so that she could stay well. But I'm here today. I'm here and I'm well. So she was able to carry the message to me, even though she didn't make it. So that's the beautiful thing about this work. It doesn't have to make sense. It just is what it is. And we help each other in ways we cannot even ever imagine, right? And I remember I kept bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. And, she said, there's a meeting in Worcester. It's like something I've never experienced before. And she kept saying, they talk about the solution. And I'm scratching my head, the solution. What is that? I got to stay sober. That's the solution, right? I can't drink and I can't drug, right? But that's really what I believed until I got here, because I really didn't understand what it was like to be a real alcoholic. Okay, I didn't get that. And I think that's the message that I'm trying to carry. This book was written for the real alcoholic. This book was written for the person who's lost the power of choice and drink. And through, hard experience, I've had to learn that, and understand that, left to my own devices, I'm not going to think myself out of this. Okay, I'm not an alcohol abuser. I'm not a person who's a certain kind of hard drinker. I am a real alcoholic. And so I have to have a spiritual experience that's going to keep me from, keep me with that defense against the first drink or the drug, right? Because somewhere down deep in the recesses of my brain, I believe that a drink or a drug is a reasonable solution to my restless, irritable, and discontent. And if I don't maintain that defense daily by staying connected to my God, which is the spiritual experience that I've had as a result of this work, then I'm going to eventually begin to think that it's okay to pick up again, because I've had the experience. I know it. That's my experience, right? So that's the experience that I carry to people that I work with, that I'm a real alcoholic. So what's the message? The message is that I got an allergy to alcohol. You know what? For whatever reason, I acquired an allergy. I can't put it in my body. When I put it in my body, I'm no longer in control. The drink is in control. It's calling the shots. I am no longer rational or reasonable, right? Sometimes I'm not rational or reasonable without a drink, but I have a little more defense if I'm not under the influence, right? And so, but what's the second part of this? The second part of this is that I have a peculiar mental twist, right? That's the ingredient of the real alcoholic. I have an allergy to alcohol or any mind-altering substance, but yet I have this peculiar mental twist that tells me that there are times that I can do it in safety, right? It's like this, in psychotherapy we call it sort of this compulsion to repeat. Like somehow if I keep doing it, I'm going to master it, right? And that's just not the case with the real alcoholic. I can keep doing it all I want, but eventually it's going to kill me because I'm never going to master it. My body is damaged in such a way that I can't go back. So no matter what my brain tells me, there's no going back. I can't. The old adage, you can't turn a pickle back into a cucumber. It becomes that simple, right? You can't turn a pickle. I'm a pickle. I can't become a cucumber again. It sounds corny, but it's the reality. But until I actually get that first part of step one, I can't do and complete the rest of the ingredients to get this perfect cake, which is my spiritual experience. And so that's the message that I carry to people. I've had a number of guys that have come in, and how do we sort of carry the message? Well, first of all, we don't go into people's homes the way we used to. We go into institutions. We carry the message through commitments. But years ago, this book was written as a text for people who couldn't get to meetings because there weren't a whole lot of meetings around. So people would get this book, they'd read it, they'd find somebody, and they'd try to work through it together. And the first real AA meeting was between Bill W. and Dr. Bob. Bill had a spiritual experience. He was in Towns Hospital. He had his third treatment. He had this white light experience. Who knows what it might have been? Could have been the belladonna treatment. Who knows? But the reality is that he had it, right? He had it. It was a God moment, right? For wherever it was, it had a God moment. And it propelled him forward in a way that, nothing else had ever done, right? And again, there's things that we can't explain it. And that's the thing about the spiritual realm, this sort of fourth dimension, is that we can't always explain it. See, that's the faith. We just have to accept it, right? So Bill goes and he's going about his life, but he's done the steps through the Oxford group, but we haven't had this yet, right? So then he goes off to a business trip and he starts having things go completely awry, things fall apart. So what does he do? He thinks about drinking, right? And he remembers what he was told, that helping other people is going to sort of save him from himself. And he didn't quite know how to go about doing that. So he went in and he found a phone booth and he started calling different, churches and found somebody who needed, help. And they set up a meeting and he had met Dr. Bob, and that's really where it began. It's kind of simplified. But the reality was that that's how it had happened, right? And so, that was the beginning of knowing that when we share our experience with other people, we strengthen this ability to really validate the experience and continue to move forward in a way that connects us to that God of our understanding, right? That's how this works. Sitting here today carrying my message to you all is one way to do it, but then after an hour and a half, the meeting's over, right? And if I do 3 or 4 meetings a week, I got all these other hours during the week that I have to do this stuff. And that really is the challenge, right? How do I do this every minute of every hour of every day? Not well sometimes, right? But I do it better than I ever had. And that's the key, right? The guy that initially took me through this work, and I always go back to that guy because he had such an instrumental role in my life. He really set the tone, and I can't say that enough, because he was an example of this work. The strength that he showed, the humility that he expressed was something that really held me, because I didn't have that, I struggled with humility. It tells us that, we alcoholics are incredibly selfish and dishonest when it comes to alcohol, right? And that's what I was. I was afraid of what people were going to think, And I never forget, once he said to me, I was relapsing in my writing, and he said, "Joe, you keep thinking you can get away with it." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I tell you when I pick up." And he's like, "That's not what I'm talking about. You keep thinking you can do it in safety. That's what I'm talking about, right?" So you can understand my perception of honesty, right, back then was very different than what it is today. The sort of this overt honesty versus this internal honesty, And that, again, is sort of a level of spiritual experience and growth that I had that I didn't have back then. But you only get that from doing this day in and day out over the years. My experience today is going to be very different than somebody who's coming in for the first time. The experience grows in depth and weight as we continue to practice this stuff day in and day out. That intuitive thought, right? That you have with the experience of doing this work, the ability to pause when I'm agitated and doubtful. That's the stuff that I find I have today that I didn't have back then. So I know I've had this spiritual experience. But I also know through experience that left to my own devices, if I don't do this, even when I don't feel like it, that the insanity could return. And what is the insanity? The insanity is, I start living by self-propulsion. I start trying to wrestle satisfaction out of life. I try to get my way. I do the footwork. I trust in God, but then I don't rely on Him, right? I kind of try to manipulate the outcome. And then, what ends up happening? I can tell you my experience. I can tell you what happened. Okay? So then I'm driving down the street, and I'm not talking about things that are bothering me, because that's an active 10-step, right? And then I'm looking out of the side of my head and I'm seeing the package store that I haven't noticed in 6 months, And then I'm not talking about that, That's the subtle insanity. That's the peculiar mental twist that I have to be vigilant about. Because if I'm not, as a real alcoholic, I'm in dangerous territory. So this is the stuff that I talk to the guys that I work with, and clearly, I've got a couple of guys that have been able to stay sober and clean and been able to get through this work and have been working on their amends. I've had others that keep picking up, and you know what? Who am I to judge? That's the reality. But there's a difference between enabling and being, accountable. And I think that's the key that I've had to learn. People had to do it with me, and and as a sponsor, I have to do it with other people. And so, what is the difference between that when we're sitting and we're trying to work with people? So, basically, it's like accountability without compassion is just cruel, right? You're just being mean. It's not okay. But compassion without accountability is enabling. Right? We have to be held accountable as people. That's why we do this work, right? We learn to understand what is our role. What am I doing to set the ball rolling? And then how do I work on making that okay? Living my amend, right? So that's the difference between, enabling and just being, insensitive to somebody's disease of addiction, right? We can't save everybody, but we can certainly be present for them and we can be available in a way that's reasonable. So, I'm not quite sure if I'm making any sense, but this is just my experience with the first part of step 12 in that, I can't get to this place if I haven't done the 11 steps prior. I have to understand that I'm an alcoholic, that I have an allergy with the peculiar mental twist. I have to understand that I'm powerlessness. It tells us in step 2 that, the purpose of this book and this work is to find a power which will solve my problem, which is my mental illness, right? So I have to believe that I have a mental illness, right? And then I have to begin to look at sort of those handicaps that have gotten in my way throughout my life, and that's in my 4th step. And then ultimately the beginning of humility, which is the 5th step in talking to people about what those character defects are, right? And then ultimately being willing to have them removed, and knowing that they're not going to be removed completely, but you know what, I have to have a willingness to do that. And that's really what this is about, is a willingness. And then, continue. Practice. 10. 10 is for me, 10 was the hardest. That's why I fell down over and over again. Is to continue to allow myself to be honest about what was going on in my life. Because I had this rigid pride that I would, such fear of what people would think about me if I talked about being afraid of my boss. You know what I mean? Like, I've done all this work, and I'm going to tell you, like, she said something to me, and I got, like, really upset. And it, like, hurt my feelings, I'm like, I'm going to talk about that stuff, But that's what I got to talk about, right? Because this is the stuff, for me, that begins to erode that connection to God. And it also keeps me from other people. It keeps me from being another person, another human being, another bozo on the bus, if you will, right? That's what it does. And so the purpose of this is to continue to grow in humility. And if I'm in humility, then I'm able to be more understanding and more effective. So that's my experience with the first part of Step 12. Thank you.